Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to AIC's webinar today, COVID-19 and Business Continuity, the Next 90 Days. I am Taryn Pyle, and I will be hosting this call today. If you are new to AICC webinars, we want to welcome you. AICC is dedicated to uniting and celebrating the success of inspired independent packaging companies through education and networking opportunities in person, online, and in print. When you invest and engage, AICC delivers a success. We have a few housekeeping details before we get started. This call will be 60 minutes long. A link to the recording will be available at aiccbox.org/COVID the Monday following the call, along with any materials discussed or offered. I do want you to know that on these calls you can hear us, but we can't hear you. And we just did a sound check earlier, but for those of you who signed on later, just look at the bottom of the screen, and if you see the chat feature and the participant feature, that is how you can communicate with us during the call. You can type your questions in the chat feature or raise your hand during the session. We will be taking these questions after the webinar as opposed to as it's going on. In the event we go over the time allotted, any other questions can be sent via email, and AICC staff or the presenter will follow up individually. With technology, there is always a possibility of losing a connection, sound, or viewing of the presentation. AICC will keep you posted on the status of any problems using the chat feature. If you get a dial tone or are disconnected from the site, you will need to call back in. This would indicate a connection problem on your end. As we begin, please remember AICC is an international trade association and as such, excuse me, members are bound to uphold the letter and spirit of all applicable competition and antitrust laws, including those of the U.S. and Canada. During this meeting, there will be no discussion allowed concerning prices, customers, customer or market allocations, specific accounts, discounts, terms, and all other matters prohibited by law. We will have to end the call immediately if there's any violation of the antitrust laws. And now I want to turn the mic over to our gracious sponsor of this webinar, Roger Poteet of Poteet Printing, to introduce the presenters. Roger, welcome, and again, thank you. Your sponsorship is helping us continue to offer valuable programs for free to our members. Roger?
Hello, Taryn. We have sound?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Hello and welcome to a continuation of the outstanding support from your AICC team. Poteet Printing Systems is pleased to take another step to support our industry at this challenging point in time. We've even devoted some of our manufacturing expertise to produce batches of hand sanitizer free of charge for our clients as scarce materials are secured. We have two very talented individuals to share their expertise with us today. Daniel Pascal is a certified protection professional and executive vice president for Margolis Healy and Associates. Their firm is a professional services firm specializing in safety, security, emergency preparedness, and regulatory compliance for communities, schools, and most importantly, workplaces. Along with them, we are fortunate to have Christopher Neuwirth, Assistant Commissioner for Public Health Infrastructure, Laboratories, and Emergency Preparedness for the New Jersey Department of Health. As you know, Chris is in the very thick of the battle there in New Jersey. Dan and Chris bring nearly 40 years of emergency management experience as practitioners and educators with expertise in business continuity and organizational resilience. I believe you will hear some good points today to assist you in your business. We will start with Dan Pascal. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Roger. Dan?
Thank you, Roger and Taryn, and good afternoon to everyone on the call today, and good morning to some of you on the West Coast. First, let me reiterate something. Technology is what it is. So to myself, I'm seeing a lot of latency, which means I may look like if you're watching my mouth, you're seeing a bodega camera. If that's the case, I apologize. Just know that this is in real time. We're going to go through a number of things today to really help you look forward for the next 90 days and thinking about your business. This is not intended in any way to be a sales pitch for me, my company, or certainly not Chris, who's giving his time as a public health official today to talk about this. It's because we understand the things that you're facing. We're all facing them. My business is facing the same challenges that you are in many ways, just we have a different type of business model. So we want to give our experience and a little bit of the research we've done to help you move forward and make sure that you're still doing tomorrow or about 91 days from now what you meant to be doing about 90 days ago. So first we want to look at the emergency management cycle. A lot of you have seen this sort of diagram, but the question is, where are we today? We're not in the prevention mode. We're not in the preparedness mode. We are in the response mode to a national emergency, one that most of us in our lifetime haven't seen the magnitude of before. And so we're trying to figure that out. And we're also trying to figure out where are we going, and that's to the recovery phase. But we're going to talk about those two things specifically and how they ultimately will guide what your business is doing. But first, let's look at some of the organizational challenges that we all must face and that really affect response to these types of emergencies. And for those of you I may have met in Atlantic City or down in Texas, you'll know, you may have seen this before. The architect of this next slide is Chris Neuwirth, who's on the call. So I'm going to let Chris go ahead and introduce this.
Hey, good afternoon and good morning to some folks on the West Coast. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak with you on really important matters regarding business continuity, recognizing that we are fully implementing all of the business continuity procedures and protocols that we always envisioned over the past number of years. And what you're seeing here is the organizational challenges that we've identified as being the cornerstones of what your organization either needs to have in place or have been identified as critical failure points in organizations to be fully resilient. And let me explain that further by diving into this slide. So what you see here are three buckets of buckets of activities that organizations need to have protocols around to ensure they're fully resilient to whatever the stressor may be. In this case, of course, it happens to be the pandemic. And the first here on the right is organization. Failures of organization confuse communications and indicate a conflict within leadership. In every emergency, in every crisis that myself, Dan, and others have been a part of, the root cause of some of the challenges the organizations have faced center around how the organization was structured in and during that crisis. So we here identify organization, how the entity, how the business mobilizes its internal structures, where it places individuals, how it sets itself up to transmit and share information as being a fundamental aspect of a resilient organization. And having a robust organization internally to help deal with the crisis is incredibly important in ensuring the organization is resilient. Continuing to the left, the bottom left under leadership, this one I think is fairly intuitive. Every crisis requires the organization to identify leaders to help the entity navigate the various things that still need to be accomplished during that crisis. Here, failures of leadership produce disorganization, of course, miscommunications, and at the end of the day, an ineffective incident management. Without leadership, there is no cohesiveness within and amongst the organization. And this, of course, promulgates people not working on the highest priority things, not setting up the organization to continue with its core business functions, and at the end of the day, resulting in the organization that is not resilient to the stressor. And after the crisis, after the pandemic, the organization, the business is in a much worse off spot without effective leadership. And the glue that holds the organization and the leadership together is, of course, communications. Failures in bidirectional communications, both top to bottom and across an organization, is what ensures that the priorities, those mission critical functions of the business remain intact. Whatever the core functions that need to continue, no matter what the crisis is, whether it be pandemic or a building fire, those communications out to the organization and the various team members are critical to ensuring that the organization can remain nimble and effective with a reduction in staff, resources, and so forth that we see in a pandemic. And I know, you can all reflect on your current situation of leadership promulgating out communications, understanding how you're organized to work remotely, and in some cases continue to work within your organizations on site to ensure that those mission critical functions remain intact throughout the pandemic. And the reason we highlight this slide right from the get-go is because if you are missing any one of these three elements, your organization is at risk of not being resilient. which is why we highlight this as the tragic trio. Every single item in any disaster, any root cause finding in any disaster can or always leads to a failure of one of these three buckets. And so it's really important that right from the get-go, we center our conversation around ensuring that these three buckets of activities are really the priority for your business continuity efforts. Dan?
Thanks, Chris. So let's look a little bit, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, on what is business continuity planning. You know, it's really a continuous process that starts very early on in your business, or should. And it's about understanding the various risks that you face. Now, that's a broad-based category that we're not going to talk about today, enterprise risk management. But when we think about this type of continuity planning, we're looking at things like natural type of disasters that we face, things that you're very common and you've heard of many times before, things like earthquakes, hurricanes, severe weather, technical risk, things like cyber intrusion, power loss, and other events that can affect your plant. And of course, human caused, the things that are low probability, extremely high impact, like active violence, workplace violence, active shooter type of threats that we see so commonly. Those are all risks that we know we're facing, right? And we have to understand how we'll determine what they are. What is the impact going to be to our organization when something happens? And then the mitigation piece is, what are the safeguards that we put in place? Some of that can be very simple things like insurance. We can't deal with this problem, so we have insurance that will cover us if we have a loss. Sometimes it's transferring risk, saying we don't want to take on that type of our business segment anymore, or we're going to outsource something. So there's various ways to have mitigation strategies. And of course, all that ties in with testing procedures and then making annual reviews to know where you are. That's all about the process, and that all sounds good, but it's a little too late for that compared to where we are now. So what we want to do is focus on what can we do, right? We find ourselves in a crisis. The prevention phase is likely past, as I said. So how we mitigate these? What are examples of mitigation strategies? Well, I named a couple of them, and we're going to look at several of them when we get into our idea of protecting health, safety, and our business. But we can plan now for how and when we'll recover. And that in and of itself is a mitigation strategy. We know that in about 91 days, we're going to be back to work, right? And as some of you, you've never stopped, but we're in a new normal right now, right? In fact, I understand that some of us are fortunate where our business model has actually ticked up a little bit during this crisis. So certainly we've seen that. Certainly we've seen a stabilization across different industries. But where will we be at day 91? So to do that, what we want you to do is focus on 5 essential areas. The first being making sure you know what your essential functions and who your essential people are. It's so important for us to know that. So look at your business process and your flows, right? What functions are absolutely necessary to continue? And this may be a difficult discussion because lots of times when we're in the boardroom, senior leadership room, or sometimes that's 3 people in a family or small business, those discussions are heated over what is actually essential to keep our business functioning and who is essential to keep our business functioning. There can be lots of factors that drive that. It can be position title, it can be ego, it can be salary cost. What we're really asking to say is who is essential to making the key decisions that will run the functions that we've identified, right? So when we ask things like, can functions be completed less frequently, temporarily? So maybe for these 90 days while we're working right now, can we just suspend doing something that's normal business practice? Perhaps we'll go back to it in 91 days. Perhaps we won't. Maybe we'll learn from it that we didn't need it in the first place because we always did what we always did. So we thought it was the right thing, right? Can we have a skeleton crew, right? What does that mean? Do we have to have 100% of our folks at work? Do we have to have 50%? Can we survive without them? You have to ask yourself those difficult questions, right? And how operations are critical business survival and recovery. So when we think about that, what are the things that are actually going to make us survive, right? And that decision is one that will be unique to all of us. Is it a certain business segment you have? Is it printing? Is it packaging? Is it labeling? Is it distribution? What are the things that are going to make you survive? In some cases, it'll be all of that. In some cases, it'll be some of it, right? Understanding your succession, your management. A lot of us have a small hierarchy that we've operated very vertically. We have a CEO or a president, we have a vice president and a director of operations, and that's my 1, 2, 3. Well, we do know when we're dealing with national emergencies, pandemics, or even technical or human-caused emergencies, that 123 might not be available. 123 may become ill. They may become unavailable to be part of the solution. We also know that we have things like charters in business and quorums that are required. So are we flexible enough to know what those are and be able to change them if we have to make key decisions in a short period of time? We also think in this phase, it's really critical for you to know who your essential suppliers and resources are. Having secondary relationships and memorandums of understanding in place. So while you may buy ink or you may buy paper from one or two manufacturers every day, having that third or fourth, whether it's through a codified agreement or at least a relationship base, because you may need them when we're facing a national emergency, may allow you to keep your essential functions moving. We also think you should identify your top customers and clients. I'm positive all of you know who they are, number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? But how will you provide service to them? Because those clients are going to be essential for you when we come out of this emergency or any emergency. You want to make sure you've delivered the services that you not only said that you would and they expected, but you've been there as a partner for them the way they've been for you, right? So that becomes really important when we look at mutual aid agreements as well, folks who can help you through processes. One of the things I really like about the AICC membership and the folks that I've worked with thus far has been that you all are a community and do work together. Even when there's not a national emergency, there's just an emergency of a time frame, for example. We need to deliver product on time. We have a big order, something happened. You work together. It's great to do that, but also really important to know what those relationships are and have them codified. And that leads us into number 2, which Chris is going to talk about, which is really the health and safety of our employees.
You know, there's really, 2 aspects to ensuring that our employees remain healthy and safe throughout, the crisis, and ensure that, that we maintain a workforce that is, able and willing to come back on the other side of this. And the first is the physical health and safety, ensuring that our folks that continue to have to work on site, have the personal protective equipment. We know nationwide right now, there is a shortage of personal protective equipment like N95, surgical face masks, and so forth. As Dan had just mentioned, where our companies, where your folks need to wear PPE on a regular basis, ensuring that you either had a cache of supplies or you had 2, 3, 4 distributors lined up to continue sourcing your PPE from is probably serving you very well right now, recognizing how difficult it is to get PPE. In other situations, identifying alternates for your staff to either change how they complete a task or change some of the workflows around so that the same level of PPE is not necessarily required to complete that task. You've all become experts, I know, as many of us, on distancing and ways to continue doing work at a distance. And that can be either, having folks, of course, work remotely, or, just physically keeping that distance if they're, on an operations floor or working in a warehouse. They're just physically able to stay, physically distant. Having the staggered shifts, of course, are always important. Because we want to ensure, as Dan had pointed out, in some of your cases, you may have had an uptick in your business models, staggering shifts so that you can continue having, a high or a functioning level of operations around the clock is really important to both keeping the people safe who have to work, but also ensuring that you're delivering to your customers. One of the first things that we had promulgated as guidance from the state level and of course nationwide is increasing in the frequency and the types of cleanings so that the folks that are on site and or interacting with each other can remain protected, as they have to touch high traffic surfaces like doors and whatnot. Increasing those cleaning schedules, making sure that you have a vendor or a process in place to have that really keeps folks safe and limits the risk of exposure. And then, of course, any chance that we can work remotely, I think is going to be, if it hasn't already, it's the new normal. Technology has certainly allows us to do this quite effectively now as best we can, and we should really embrace that as best we can. Now, the much harder conversation and something that we're going to continue to have to deal with for months, well beyond the 90 days, for months or years to come, is the emotional and behavioral health and safety of all of our workforce and ourselves. We want to make sure that folks from the leadership to the entry-level employee has the resources they need to help cope and manage the stress and the issues that naturally come from having to live through a crisis like this. And that also includes issues that they have at home, such as childcare and family needs. We all know that's an issue. So being as flexible as possible, allowing folks to come in later, work later, have staggered shifts, whether they work 2 days on, 1 day off, or 4 days on, a day off. And then physically, we're just checking in on each other, having that sense of community. I know many of your entities are already close-knit. This organization is quite close-knit. And, in times of crises like this, it's that stuff that matters, that we're taking care of each other and looking out for the needs of our coworkers and our colleagues across the industry.
Great. And that leads us to communication. And so we want to talk about a little bit more about emergency communication. I think as we looked at the tragic trio earlier on, and we look at communication, it can take many different forms. First, there's just physical communication sometimes during an emergency. What are the platforms that we use to let our employees know we're going to get to them, whether that's telephone, email, our social media posts that we have, an intranet. So that's one aspect of it. What we want to focus on is really the elements from a leadership perspective that you're taking with your company. And that's first, to communicate often. I know it sounds cliche, but over communicate if you have to, right? Every day is not too much. Multiple times in a day may be required depending on who you are in your business model, right? So that's coming from senior leadership of the company. You have to be out there. You have to be visual. You have to be seen by others, right? Company-wide, let them know who you are, that you're there, and that you care. Consider holding virtual team meetings. I will tell you, I am passing up my virtual team huddle today. I have all of my direct reports, which are my vertical directors, as we call them. Every day we do a virtual water cooler huddle via Slack, right? Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 25 minutes. We talk a little business, but everybody talks about their family. Sometimes their dogs are in the back of the picture, their cats, or other exotic animals I'm not allowed to reference here, Tiger King pictures, you name it. It's okay. I think it's really important right now to go back to our psychological needs, that when we're communicating, we're doing it in a way that's effective and lets people communicate out how they're feeling. Remember, your employees are not just not coming to work, they're not seeing their friends and other people who are important to them. So they're not getting that socialization. So believe it or not, I'm it for the day. And I think you should be too, and consider those sorts of things. When you're communicating, of course, be transparent, goes without saying. Confront brutal facts though, right? We want to be optimistic. We want to have our employees understand the situation, but we also have to confront brutal facts. If we don't know, it's okay. Say, we don't know. Don't know when you're coming back to work. Don't know when you'll be back to full schedule. Don't know if this is going to impact layoffs in the future, because you just don't know. It's not going to be helpful for you to tell them that you do, or just paint a picture of rosiness that's not going to happen, right? But of course, you want to do that in a way that's empathetic, and you want to be consistent in your communications. If nothing else, where the communication starts and who it comes from is so important. We've all played grapevine a little bit, I assume, at some point in our lives, and we know that one message carries from one person to the next, and by the time it translates to the end of this meeting, you'll have heard something completely different. So being consistent in who's giving the message, what it is, and being transparent is really important for your employees, but also for them to understand where that leadership is coming from. I know some of us are family businesses. We know our folks really well. They know us. They see us every day. Some of us are in a position where our employees may not see the president or CEO daily. So we're a large group that's kind of diverse. But at the end of the day, we have that common thread. Your employees look for leadership in these times of crisis, and they need to hear from you. They need you to be out there, and they need to understand that the situation, whatever it is, good or bad, that you're addressing it and you have a plan for the future. And I know that's a really big sort of ask of everybody, how to do that. So if you've never taken a PIO course before, certainly you can look things up. You can Google things. If you don't have an emergency manager, communicator on your staff, there's companies out there who do it. But since you probably don't have time for that right now, if you haven't done it, get on Twitter, get on your email, get on your phone, get on your public address system, whatever you have to do, and let everybody know what's happening in the company and where you are today, and where you expect to be next week and the following weeks after it. That's going to move us to category number 4, which is assessing impact. This is such a wide variety, but it is so important for each of you to be doing right now on your business. I'm sure you're doing it at minimum on a micro level, small meetings, department managers, section chiefs, and senior leadership is trying to look at the big picture, the vision, right? But we have to anticipate through data when we have it, or through assumptions if we don't have it, the potential operational and financial impacts to the business, right? And what it's likely to be in the short term and longer term. And I think if you've watched any of our public health information briefings right now with Dr. Fauci, who's become the star he never wanted to be, one of the things he'll tell you is that our data is only as good as our assumptions, right? So our predictions, our models, if the information we put into the assumption is wrong, then our model is going to be wrong, and the information we have will be useless. And you see that changing dramatically. So for those of you who are watching this emergency situation now, a couple weeks ago, probably 8 to 10 days ago, and Chris can confirm, we originally heard that this pandemic could kill 100 to 240,000 Americans. The most updated model as of today with Dr. Fauci is up to 60,000 Americans is where they're thinking right now, as of 2 hours ago, right? So the assumptions change. So we have to look at that the same way for our business and what we're thinking about, and really identify what this means to us and what the metrics are for you when these things happen. So what's the potential loss of your sales or your income? And for you, what does that mean at various levels? What does it mean to your business if you lose 5%, 10%, 15, and 20%? You should make those models and understand if this, then that. If I lose 20% for 3 months, can I endure that? Does my staffing stay the same? Is my rent okay? Are my benefits and insurance okay? Are my resources okay? Can I still purchase from my suppliers? At different levels, what will that mean? What will the impact to your business be? What will it be if you have a cash loss because you have delayed sales or income or receivables? Like a lot of businesses, even in my business, I have a number of accounts receivable that are now over 120 days. We accept this, we know that, and we plan for it. We also are not putting pressure on our clients to pay because we realize procurement departments are largely working from their kitchen right now, trying to find where that bill is that's been sitting on their desk for a week and a half. So we're not going to abandon our partners, and we're in a position to carry cash flows out, but I know exactly how long that is. I know exactly how long our business can go if our receivables don't come in the door. Whether they're on paper or not as a receivable at this point in time in a national emergency is irrelevant. But we also know what to do and how to do that. Also take into account, do you have increased expenses? Do you have contracts? Do you have hazard pay? Do you have overtime? Do you have to outsource more? We talked about increased cleaning schedules. Is that in-house? Is it someone who does that? Have you outsourced that service and now you're paying for them? Did you bring in additional security people, possibly to watch over your property or your assets or your factory? All of those costs now increased expenses, obviously, when you're potentially in a delayed sales, income, or loss prevention. So you need to understand what that impact is. Some of you may have facility issues that you're going to either have to retrofit, or you already have retrofitted, or you may be impacted because you have sick employees, which we haven't even talked about yet. So how will you do that? What will it look like if you have to clean up an entire part of your facility? If you have to close a section of your facility, can you still now hit the essential functions that we talked about in step 1? And of course, what happens if we lose our employees? What is the minimum amount of employees you can operate on? So first, we talked about a voluntary skeleton crew. But what happens if 30 to 40% of your employees become ill? Do you have redundancies? Do you have single points of failure where, and I'm just making this up, of course, because I've been to a couple of our plants. If Dan and Chris are the only two who can operate widget number 1, I mean widget in a respectful way, of course, and Dan and Chris are sick, does that take out the single point of failure? Can we no longer operate widget number 1, which is absolutely essential to your business? If so, we're not prepared, right? So those are the types of things that we have to identify. During pandemics, we can't assume that our staff is all going to be there for us. As much as they want to be, we may lose them. And of course, how you respond to this, how you treat your employees, and how you communicate may very well have an impact on your reputation. It may not, of course, but it may have an impact on your reputation with your peers, with your customers, or with your community. So it's really important to also think how that's going to be impacted. And while it's not your number one concern on a day-to-day basis, it certainly has to figure into senior leadership's decision-making. What will the result be, and how will we communicate what we did, and we assess what that impact is going to be? And that leads us into our final phase. And I think we're in good time right now to get through this to allow time for Q&A, which I hope we'll do, which is, I'm going to turn over to Chris, which is really the big part we care about too, is recovery and restoration, how we'll get back to what we're doing and what a recovery phase looks like. Chris?
You know, what's important to remember, despite, you know, everything we're facing right now day to day, is that we're going to get through this. This will end, and we will be able to get back to life as normal, both professionally and personally. And, you know, we always want to be thinking about what does the recovery and restoration look like as early as possible, so that we can begin understanding, you know, what will that transition back to the, you know, back to normal look like, and, you know, how can we facilitate it? Now, despite recognizing there's still a lot of unknowns, and, you know, depending on where you are in the country, you may or may not be near, you know, the peak surge. And so, you know, we all won't experience the recovery, you know, in the same time frame. But it is important to consider, you know, will we, you know, think about, you know, will we be bringing back all the employees all at once? You know, what do we need to do as far as terminally cleaning our workspaces, the production equipment? You know, what do we need to do in the facility now that it's been relatively dormant, or certainly less than at 100% capacity for several weeks, if not months? What does the facility need to get back up and running? You know, do we have inventory? What does our supply chain look like? Just because, you may be located in Kansas, but you have distributors or suppliers coming out of Los Angeles and New York, just because you're back up and running doesn't necessarily mean, you know, other aspects of your supply chain are fully, at 100%. So understanding, you know, all aspects of your business, where everyone falls in the recovery timeline, is going to be important to understanding, you know, when are you fully, you know, back at 100%. Now, one thing I want to point out before we jump into the Q&A is that there is the federal government Small Business Administration assistance. If you haven't gone to this website yet, please do, sba.gov. At the very top, there's a COVID-19 link. There are resources, forgivable loans that turn into grants, and other financial assistance programs that you should all be, you know, looking at to see if you're eligible to take advantage of. It's really important that you seek out as much assistance as possible, even if you may not be, you may not fully need it. It's important to understand, you know, what are the thresholds? Are you eligible? And if you are, apply. It certainly can't hurt to pursue it and see what happens. So again, sba.gov for those programs. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dan and Taryn so that we can jump into the Q&A.
I'm gonna first wrap up with our next 90-day schedule, right? So I want to go through these points. So first, hang in there, right? The next 90 days are going to be really volatile, probably trying on us, and may in fact lead to more uncertainty than we already have. So, you know, while we think that we're coming out of it, we're hearing some optimism, right? There may actually be more uncertainty that comes out over the next 90 days. So hang in there, understand that, right? We talked about communicating early and often with your customers. If you're not already doing it, do it today. Get off this call and figure out what your communication strategy is going to be. And as you start to understand the impact to your business that we talked about and what it might mean 30, 60, 90 days and day 91 from now, communicate that out. So those will be a little bit different, right? Your employees need to feel like there's something to come back to when you know that, and they're looking forward to that. And your customers need to know that you're going to be there for them. And again, brutally, will you be able to do the same thing you did for me last week as you can today, right? And if you don't know, you'll have to tell your customers you don't know too, right? So put that energy into the essential operations of the business, whatever service it is needed to best put your clients. So again, you have to understand for you what is really necessary. And I know that word means a lot of different things to different people. As I've spoken to various business leaders over the past few weeks, it jumps from the very elementary employee in the organization, because as a leader, as a doer, we want to say everyone matters to me, everyone is important to me. and I'm not going to leave anyone behind. But as the business leader who's responsibly looking at the bottom line and how do I survive this national emergency, sometimes it's not everyone. It's not going to be everyone. So you have to face that and confront those brutal facts, right? We talked about the emotional and physical health. If you're not already practicing the physical health suggestions that Chris reviewed, please do. If you have questions about them, please stay on as we move into a Q&A period right now, because I think it's really important for you to do that. I recognize it's challenging in our facilities. Some of our employees must work very closely. There's interaction and transfer of product and materials that's going on throughout the day. So if there's things that we need to consider, maybe we'll even brainstorm them with you. There's certainly no assurity that we have those answers, but it's something that we can certainly talk through as a group, or share your own experiences as a group who are on this call right now. But really important to remember that folks are going to rely on you in a lot of ways. So we need you to understand that you have to give back to those employees and their emotional health as well, whether that's an employee assistance program, whether that's being flexible, family time, extended PTO time, congratulations, reward, or incentive post-national emergency, right? Recognizing the folks that kept you moving and kept your business alive. Yes, they get a paycheck, and that's a good reward in of itself, right? Because we can all feed our families. And they make our business survive, and they make us who we are. We want to reward them. So perhaps consider those after emergency sort of incentive programs for your employees, right? If you haven't done a business impact analysis, do that today. If you don't know how to do it, there's great resources and things that you can look at for free via the internet. Ready.gov has those tools available. They are sort of simplistic in nature, but certainly can put you on the right course if you need to do that, with spreadsheets and data sheets that you're able to just scroll through that'll ask you essential questions and help you quantify the various aspects of your business, so you can start seeing what that looks like in a more dashboard type of way. I know a lot of us, our leaders, like to look at dashboards. They don't like to look at long spreadsheets unless you're an accountant. And then if you're on this call and you're an accountant, it's probably not for you. Be prepared to recover from the emergency, right? And adapt to the changing landscape, because we don't know what that's going to be day 91. So a lot of you are doing that already. I know I see folks that are on camera are probably sitting at home. Maybe some of you were in your office. What does that look like? Do we go back to work? Does everybody go back? And do we have to tier who is going back into that, right? So for example, if in fact we were going to assume everyone's going to come back to work day 91, perhaps we don't have to. Perhaps some of us can phase in. We need to bring back various elements. And as the emergency gets lifted and national things change, we can do that. But just because one group is back doesn't mean everyone in the company has to be back at the same time. So only you know what those decisions will be and how to do that. And then most importantly, I want everyone on this call to remember to take care of themselves. What makes, I think, everyone a great leader is that we're caring, compassionate, empathetic, and we want to make sure our employees and our business survives, right? For some of us, we're small businesses, we're owners, we're family businesses. We have tons of pride, and years and legacy before us have put a lot of sweat equity into building who we are. And we don't take the time to actually self-rationalize and recognize what the emotional and physical impact is to us during this. I'm going to guess a lot of you on this webinar today have been putting in at least 8 to 12 hours per day, your normal day plus, right? Even though maybe it's a little different because you got to take the dog out or you got to make lunch at home for the kids, you're still putting in that time or more every day and not recognizing the toll that it's having on you. So make sure that you take care of yourself as well. I know some of us have a little ego and we say, we'll do that in 91 days. But if you want to make it to day 91, sometimes you have to do it today, right? So with that, I'm going to just give you some information how to stay connected with both ourselves and both Poteet, who are sponsoring this webinar today. It's contact information. Again, we're not here to make a sales pitch to you today for our service. We work in this field a lot. We're here to help out all of you who have been good to us, and we want to be good to you. If there's something you can do, a question you have that's offline or you think of later, please reach out for us. Ask the question. If we can give you the answer, we'll do it right away. If it's through one of our subject matter experts, we'll reach out for them as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Taryn.
Thank you very much, Dan and Chris. And for those of you on the line, if you have a question, you can raise your hand or you can post it in the chat area. Very interesting. I think sometimes we forget of what happens after the 90 days. And I appreciate your saying that. It's like, whoa, we got to think about that, don't we? You know, inventory and things like that. I have a question for you. What do you think, looking at, you know, you work within our industry, what are some of the areas or places we tend not to focus or we forget to look at when it comes to getting through the first 90 days?
Great question. For me, I think one of the things that we forget to do are what I just ended with, which is the self-care issues for ourselves and our employees. We're very worried about our customers. We're worried about receivables, as we should be, and where we're going to be 90 days from now. But we always have to remember, our businesses can't survive if our most valuable asset, our people, don't survive. And that's mentally and physically. And that takes a lot of toll on us. So not only are they concerned with business, they're also concerned with their families, just like we are. So a lot of times we kind of jump into the response and we think of the operations, or if you will, we want to put the wet stuff on top of the hot stuff because that's the immediate big tangible thing in front of us. But if we're not thinking about how is the hose connecting to the fire hydrant and how we're going to get it to where it needs to be, we can't put the fire out. So I think that's one of the things that we miss often is taking care of our employees and taking care of ourselves to be ready to do the response phase.
Thank you. Chris, question for you. You have some insight from your position in the New Jersey government. Do you expect states, when they reopen things, to require PPE to some degree, face masks, et cetera?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Simply stated, when life begins to return to normal, it's going to happen because the traditional public health practices, such as social distancing, isolation, routine use of personal protective equipment, is no longer needed. And so while each state's government and the politics around what each state is experiencing as far as the surge goes, generally speaking, the public health officials at the state level will make a determination to begin to reopen society when those things are no longer needed. And so I would not expect generally that PPE would be required to return back. But what this experience really needs to highlight for all of us, besides the fact that this pandemic has fundamentally changed, all aspects of our lives, and certainly our industry, public health, healthcare, emergency management will forever be changed. What we should all certainly take away from this is that we need to do a better job at staying clean. We need to wash our hands better. We need to use hand sanitizers, cover our coughs and sneezes. And single-handedly, the most important takeaway must be that if we are not feeling well, that we stay home from work. And it doesn't matter if it's SARS-CoV-2 or the seasonal influenza. If you are sick, potentially with a respiratory virus where you're coughing or sneezing, it doesn't matter what the pathogen is, you're infecting other people. So we have to use this as an opportunity to remind ourselves, it matters that you stay home when you're sick.
That's kind of a hard thing for a lot of people, especially baby boomers,
Absolutely.
Next question. How important is what happens in China now that they have lifted their shelter in place and allowed travel?
It's inconsequential. And the reason being is it's a pandemic, and by definition, there is widespread community level transmission across the globe. And so it doesn't matter, what China is doing. It's here in the United States. It's generally in most communities widespread transmission. And again, what other countries are doing are really, really just serve as examples to us to see if it works or not, and to see if there's anything we can learn and apply here. We should basically be understanding that the pathogen is here in our communities, and whatever the public health officials are doing in your state and in your communities, to follow it to the best of your ability. Because what we know works is, especially to flatten that curve, is social distancing and staying as isolated from one another as possible.
So as a follow-up to that question, do you think they'll see a resurgence in China?
So there is likely to be some level of resurgence globally, just based on the attributes and characteristics that we know of coronaviruses. So there's seasonal coronaviruses in our communities every year. This one just happens to be novel. And every year you see, peaks and valleys of this virus in the communities. We will likely see the same thing with SARS-CoV-2 until a vaccine is created and put into the seasonal flu vaccine. And so we should expect that, in the coming months, we may see some degree of concern about community transmission again. And we may have to implement some level of public health mitigation measures in the next flu season, recognizing it may take 12 to 18 months to get a vaccine in place.
Thank you. Dan, many of our plants have limited entrance and egress to employees or those that have been screened. Having seen you speak to AICC previously, please explain why this might be a good practice continue post-crisis and other plant security practices.
Yeah, great question. So obviously, in general, we recommend that almost all of our plants limit the points of ingress they have that are certainly those that are unmonitored on a regular basis. We recognize there's usually a separate employee entrance, possibly a visitor entrance, and of course, we all have loading areas and docks that have to be open. So we recommend that you limit those points of entry during even regular times and regular business operations. But right now, it's even more important because the more entrances and exits we have, guess what? The more entrances and exits we have to clean, we have to monitor, and we have to make sure our employees are coming and going from, right? So if you can limit the entryways that are being used, it's not just good from a security practice, but it allows us to control who's coming in and out. It allows us to make sure if we know somebody should or shouldn't be coming out, that we've limited that, but it also allows us to have good, clean, hygienic measures in place to take care of those particular locations. So I think it's best if you have the ability to isolate your visitors if they're still coming to your company from your employees. And obviously where we're going to have deliveries and loading areas can be treated completely separately. There is a little bit of good news. Our loading areas being open does give us open air and ventilation, but obviously bringing trucks in and materials that we're handling and having one-on-one contact with drivers and delivery folks, we still have that risk of exposure to this particular emergency that we're facing. In general, it's a good security practice to have those areas secured if no one is there actively monitoring. And having gone to a few of our plants here for AICC members, I know that's extremely challenging from both a technological, physical, and human standpoint to get folks to actually secure those things, stay on them, and not go reopen them. So if you can, please enforce those policies and procedures to the best of your ability. And if you don't have them, consider creating a policy that surrounds that and makes folks responsible and accountable for securing those doors.
Thank you. We have quite a quiet group today. If there's any other questions, please either raise your hand or post it in the group chat area. Dan, is there anything else you would like to add that we may not be thinking about?
Yeah, I'd like to close again just by letting everyone know and reminding everyone that this is a national emergency, right? So not only are we all facing it here, when we say national, our regional partners are affected here. The other countries, North America and the world is affected. So when we think about planning and resources and our help and our mutual aid, it's a little different than we're used to, right? So despite what you may see on the media, and I am not in a political position like Chris, and people sort of playing a little bit of a blame game back and forth with each other. Remember, all emergencies are local in the same way that all politics are local. So when it comes down to planning for your business and how you're going to respond and how you're going to react, it is incumbent upon you to take proactive measures to put safety measures, security measures, and emergency response measures and business continuity in place. You cannot hope that you'll pick up the phone, call 911, and that the local emergency manager or town is going to come solve the problem. That works if you have a plant fire. It works if you have an act of violence. Yes, they're going to come and help you. But when the entire nation and the entire world is gripped by an emergency, if you haven't taken the steps that we've talking about to put good business continuity practices in place, and that starts with the planning and preparedness and then gets into the mitigation and response, you are likely far behind the curve. And that's why we wanted to point out today, look, even if you're not there, it doesn't mean doom and gloom for your business. There's still time to focus on these critical aspects to get you through the next 90 days and out of it. But when you do come out of this and you get back to activity, I encourage you, I actually beg everyone on this call to take time to sit down, form a task force in their company, and look at business continuity planning, look at enterprise risk management and the things that you're facing. In 2009, I was a director of emergency management at Rutgers University when we went through the H1N1 scare, right? After that, in 2010, my first presentation was how my colleagues at colleges and universities weren't prepared for H1N1 and don't let it happen again. And since then, we've had Ebola and we've had SARS and we've had other outbreaks. And I find myself in a position where many businesses, government entities, and educational institutions still haven't invested the time, energy, or resources into it. I get it. We don't have a lot of them. Our time, our energy, our resources are finite. But I would tell you that this is the type of thing that can take a 50-year business off the books tomorrow, right? And we can't let that happen. So just like you wouldn't have your competitor do it, just like you wouldn't fall behind the times in technology and your machinery, you have to be planning and preparing for how your business will respond, react, and be flexible when we have an all hazards type of emergency occur. So that would be my best advice I can leave everyone with today. Chris, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to that, but that's really my concern. So as an emergency manager, I just beg everyone to put the energy into this when we recover.
Yeah, I'll echo just a fraction of what Dan had said, and really, begin now reflecting on this experience to start to document what worked and what didn't work, and things that you would change moving forward. Like I said, and I think we all recognize, we're going to get through this. There's going to be a lot of lessons learned, but what we can certainly do is on the other side of this is document and formulate business continuity plans that will actually, be very useful and very tangible for whatever may come in the future. And while it may not necessarily be a pandemic, for various things, hurricanes, to, again, a building fire or something that disrupts your business, what we're experiencing today is going to be the foundation of our business continuity plans moving forward.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Chris. No more questions. I just really appreciate your taking the time to do this for us. Thank you, Roger, for Poteet sponsoring this event and making it happen. We had close to 60 people online, so I know it was very valuable information, and I just appreciate all that you guys have done for us. Look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Those that are on the call, look forward to seeing you all tomorrow on the COVID call tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and we'll talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.